This information might shock you. While cats are generally treated decently worldwide, the Australian government is offering 10 Australian dollars for the scalp of an adult cat. That's around $6.50 in US dollars. Hold off on judgment for a moment. You'll understand why soon. They're also willing to pay $5 for a kitten scalp, which equals $3 in US dollars. Furthermore, they'll pay $15.50 for a fox scalp, equivalent to $10 in US dollars, and $10 for a feral pig scalp. Dingoes fetch the highest price at $120 each. Even kangaroos can earn you around $18. But what's the reason behind this? Let's find out. Hey, just a quick heads up. If you've forgotten to give us a thumbs up, please do so now. In short, the problem boils down to upsetting the natural balance of things. The animals we just talked about are causing a catastrophic impact on other species and the land as a whole. Yes, even kangaroos. But we'll get back to them shortly. Remember that thought. Animal rights activists, they're the ones doing this, are killing a lot of animals in Australia. For instance, in Kakadu National Park, they've taken out 6,000 wild buffalo, horses, donkeys, and pigs in just 24 days. Ecologists say that tens of thousands of foreign herbivores are turning the desert into dust and wetlands into muddy wastelands. That's why they argue that getting rid of these animals is necessary. Most environmentalists see eradicating invasive species as a straightforward way to help restore the deteriorating landscape, which is happening rapidly. However, other experts argue that it's not just about getting rid of certain species, it's about the entire ecosystem of Australia being so out of order that constant intervention is necessary. As usual, things are quite complicated and there's no easy fix. Solving the issue with donkeys is quite simple. Just cut down on the livestock, which also harm the soil, and lay off hunting dingoes who prey on donkeys. That way the ecosystem can recover naturally and people won't need to resort to killings. But that's easier said than done, and oversimplified. Several factors have come together for the natural ecosystems of Australia to collapse. Firstly, its geographical isolation played a key role. Being cut off from the rest of the world, Australia developed its own distinct flora and fauna, which struggled to adapt to foreign intruders. Secondly, despite this poor adaptability, the continent became a hotspot for invasive species. These intruders found their way into Australia through various means, whether intentionally introduced or stowing away unnoticed. Ultimately, all of this resulted in a catastrophe, with people actively getting involved, putting up fences, carrying out culls, and strangely enough, all of this also makes Australia unique, in its own way, somewhat harsh, but unique. Every year, the government has to spend a whopping $25 billion just to get rid of pests. Cats top the list of unwanted animals, costing $18.8 billion, followed by rabbits, fire ants, the unexpectedly problematic ryegrass, pigs, a couple more plants, foxes, and so on. Of course, hunting animals isn't done recklessly with the mindset of the more the better. Every year, authorities carry out surveys using helicopters and planes, occasionally assisted by ground inspections. Following this, they establish yearly quotas on species and the number of animals that can be hunted. In certain states, this is capped at 20%, whereas in Victoria, it's strictly under 10%. Let's take kangaroos, for example. In 2023, it was allowed to hunt around 5 million of them. But why kangaroos, some viewers may wonder? They're not an invasive species. True, we'll get to that explanation in a bit, including why the quota was increased in 2023 compared to the previous year. Keeping track of animal populations and setting quotas is quite a challenge. For instance, when it comes to pigs, it's important to consider how fast they breed and spread. Scientists have found that at least 70% of the pig population needs to be culled to prevent it from bouncing back too quickly. Now let's find out why animal advocates had issues with all the mentioned animals. In Australia, most of the animals hunted for sport and leisure are invasive species, such as feral cats, wild dogs, goats, foxes, rabbits, feral pigs, buffalo, as well as feral donkeys, horses, and camels. The species that can be hunted vary depending on the state and territory, along with the requirements needed to obtain a hunting permit. Just to make sure we're clear, this is a totally legal activity approved by the government. With that out of the way, let's move on. Remember feral cats? They're offering 10 Australian dollars for adults and 5 for kittens. They're targeting specifically the feral ones, so Australians are strongly advised against letting their pets roam outside. According to estimates, wildcats in Australia kill around 750,000 birds every day, and offering rewards for their heads has been seen as a response to the explosive growth in population. Cats cover 99.8% of the continent's territory, with a population of 6.3 million individuals, roughly one cat for every 1.5 square miles. All these cats pose a deadly threat to local species that evolved without feline predators and have no idea how to defend against them. That's why the government has already invested millions in programs to control the wild cat population. But it seems like the cats are still ahead of us. In September 2023, officials basically declared war on cats. They put out a plan that includes making programs for amateur hunters to shoot wild cats and euthanize some cats caught in the wild. Essentially, it means regular people can take care of all of this themselves. However, such permits are simply a new set of measures aimed to help. In the past, for instance, poisoned sausages were scattered everywhere, both manually and directly from airplanes, 50 pieces every 250 acres. Following the declaration of war on feral cats, the government has pledged $5 million in support of community groups that can hunt cats on the front line. It seems like where sausages didn't quite cut it, the desire to earn some cash will help out. Surprisingly, the price tag for feral pigs is the same as for cats, $10 each. Wild pigs cover 45% of Australia's land, and the Invasive Species Council estimates their population ranges between 2 to 4 million, depending on the season. They cost the agricultural sector $106.5 million annually, not to mention the environmental damage leading to biodiversity loss. Plus, they spread deadly diseases. Basically, not the kind of neighbors you'd want to have. In October 2021, the National Feral Pig Action Plan proposed using multiple approaches to manage their numbers, including shooting, baiting, trapping, and fencing. Don't forget, we've got to take out at least 70% of these wild hogs. It's a lot of work, and unlike some other invasive critters, there's no big campaign against shooting them. People hunting wild hogs is just a regular thing. The main aim of all these measures is to significantly reduce the population of wild pigs and keep it at that level in the long term. The problem is that this isn't a one-and-done deal. Right now, there are so many pigs in Australia that people simply can't afford to stop. Otherwise, they'll rebound and we'll have to start all over again. It's true that the Invasive Species Council believes funding amateur hunters with taxpayer dollars is just throwing money away. However, such a provision does exist in the program. Shooting from the air is generally the most effective way to deal with a large number of pigs, followed by culling and trapping. So what about amateur hunters? It's simple. If there are only a few pigs on your property, shooting them is a quick and reliable solution to the problem. Farmers whose land has been invaded by wild pigs shouldn't hesitate to take matters into their own hands, plus it'll be a big help to the government. In other respects, just like any hunting, there are unique aspects to this. For instance, before the crop is ripe, pigs are caught using bait and traps. When pigs have plenty to eat and aren't falling for bait anymore, people resort to shooting them from the air. But let's face it, it's pretty expensive. On average, it's about $4,000 for a half-day session, covering helicopter rental, fuel, and ammo. The upside? In one 5-hour session, roughly 431 pigs are eliminated across an area of more than 20 square miles. Also, the government foots the bill for these shoots. Here's a different take on the cane toad story. These creatures are invasive pests, and they're multiplying like crazy. Estimates suggest that there are already 200 million of these toads in Australia. They're a real threat to about 75 local species because they're toxic. Aussie animals try to munch on them but end up getting poisoned. Plus, these toads are eating everything in sight. Despite this, the government isn't paying for toad eradication, not yet. The potential cost could be around 10 Australian cents per toad or 7 US cents. For the third year in a row, Australians living in areas where the cane toads thrive are being asked to join an effort to get rid of them. The initiative is led by a nonprofit environmental group called WATOP. The basic kit includes gloves, a bucket, and a flashlight. Last year's festival saw a group of people snagging more than 2,700 toads, claiming the unofficial first place. Experts recommend collecting toads at night, while it's best to catch tadpoles and small toadlets during the day. To humanely euthanize toads, experts recommend a painless method called stepwise hypothermia. This involves placing the toads in a container with breathing holes and then putting them in the refrigerator for about 24 hours. After that, they're transferred to the freezer for at least another 24 hours. If you don't want to keep bags of toads in your fridge, there are points where you can drop them off. Back in 2019, Australian Senator Pauline Hanson floated the idea of paying people to get rid of cane toads. She proposed a rate of 10 Australian cents per toad. She figured it could attract a range of people, from those relying on benefits to kids off school, but critics like environmentalists slammed the notion, arguing that exchanging money for toads wouldn't really solve the problem. It'd just mean the government shelling out cash. Despite that, the yearly efforts to collect cane toads keep going. The latest one ran from January 13th to 21st, 2024, but Australians are advised to keep catching these invasive creatures even after January 21st because the campaign is really paying off. In a single week, people cleared out more than 50,000 cane toads from the wild. According to water gum representatives, people are coming up to them saying they've seen the cane toad population dwindling and local nature getting cleaner. People feel safer and even let their pets out at night without worrying they'll accidentally lick toxins. Now let's talk about dingoes and their hybrids with dogs. They're the priciest animals you can hunt down under the Australian government's permission, costing $120 per head. Compared to toads, it's like hitting the jackpot. It's especially weird when you think about how hunting dingoes is such a hot topic among animal lovers. Some people say dingoes are feral dogs wreaking havoc in Australia and need to be dealt with to protect farm animals. Others reckon dingoes have been living on the continent for ages, making them a legit part of the local ecosystem. And when we say ages, we're talking a minimum of 4,000 years. Maybe even longer, potentially over 7,000 years, according to some reports. Killing dingoes in Australia has become acceptable since European ranchers began farming on this continent 2 centuries ago. Originally, it was seen as just a routine and necessary way of managing things. Then in the 20th century, environmentalists and nature advocates argued that dingoes should be protected, leading to debates. Nonetheless, the Australian government has invested millions in dingo control programs, actively employing poisonings, trapping, and shooting. Nevertheless, ecologists claim these measures are futile. Dingoes continue to prey on sheep and goats, and attempts to manage their population only exacerbate the problem. Right now, amateur hunters are allowed to take down dominant dingo hybrids on vast territories beyond state zones with bounties. That means they can't shoot pure dingoes. But what's happening is hunters can legally shoot what they call wild dogs, many of which are dingoes, and then pass them off as hybrids to claim a bounty. And they get a hefty reward for it. This whole thing just makes the situation even more contentious. But even dingoes aren't as odd as kangaroos. They pay $18 for every killed animal. Can you believe it? They claim to protect local species, yet they're the ones culling them. That's absurd. Nevertheless, kangaroos are hunted in 6 Australian states for their hides and meat, and also because they're seen as pests to farms. But that's just one part of the problem. According to the government and wildlife experts, certain types of kangaroos are just too numerous, and it's essential to cull them to keep their population in check and avoid animals suffering, particularly when they compete with domestic livestock for food and water, especially during dry spells. According to the Environment Minister, it's necessary to keep a check on kangaroo numbers to protect other species that are at risk of disappearing. Government programs state that licensed hunters are compensated for every pound of kangaroo they hunt, and the meat, hides, and skins are processed for export to approximately 70 countries. Kangaroos are hunted at night, using lights to blind them before shooting. 1 shot equals 1 kill, no exceptions. Afterward, the bodies are taken to a processing center where they're examined, treated, and readied for sale. Is there another way to control the population without resorting to killings? There actually is one. Sometimes they just catch kangaroos and neuter them. But these procedures are really expensive, and according to scientists, this method just won't cut it on a large scale. See you later.